To our Restream with Lori Gottlieb. I'm Livia Kent. I'm editor-in-chief of Psychotherapy Networker, and I'm thrilled. That's no lie. That's not a platitude, Lori. I'm thrilled to be here with you. For those of you who don't know who Lori is, I'm sorry, you must be living under a rock, but I'll say it anyway. Lori, where do we start? So Lori writes the weekly Atlantic column, Dear Therapists. And there's a podcast produced by Katie Couric called Dear Therapists, plural, right? That's the distinction.
Yes.
Lori is the New York Times best-selling author of a book everyone should go out and read immediately if you haven't already, called Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. And there's an accompanying workbook, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, a toolkit for editing your story, and I don't have my glasses, Changing Your Life, which I know is also out and readily available for everyone. Lori, I'm not going to read the list of media platforms that you regularly appear on, because then we would be here all afternoon. But needless to say, you are a known and well-respected figure throughout our national conversation. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for being a contributor to Networker Magazine.
Well, of course, and I am equally thrilled to be here today.
So, Lori, we invited you to take a little dive in. This is from our January issue. It's an issue we did called Family Rifts. And this is all about healing rifts between family members. Your article we called Estrangement 101. And we really focus in on the estrangements between parents and kids. And before we dive in, I just realized I failed to do my job as the editor of this magazine by telling people that you can subscribe for a special deal for $12 for the year by going to psychotherapynetworker.org/Gottlieb. It's a special deal that you can get. You can also download and read this article that we're about to discuss for free. So the link is posted in the comments section wherever you're joining us from. That said, let's go back. Kids cutting off parents. Apparently that happens a lot. As a new parent, that's a little scary to me, but I know that as a clinician, you see that a lot. So let's start there. Why, outside of abuse, which is a, somewhat black and white area for this, outside of the area of abuse, why would a child cut off a parent?
I think there are so many reasons that it happens. I think often it happens because the child, and we're talking about adult children,
right,
the child feels like nothing will change. They feel like every time they're with the parent, they feel injured, they feel hurt, they feel misunderstood. It exhausts them emotionally, and they feel like there's nothing else they can do. Another reason, and this sometimes is outside of the child's awareness, is the only way that I will ever get your attention is if I cut you off, and then you will see how hurt I am. You will that will get your attention to see the things that I have been unable to convey to you about what is hurting me in this relationship.
So it's a way to be heard, but perhaps not an effective way, because how do you have a real dialogue when you're estranged? You also talk a little bit in the article about how in this kind of me first culture, there's this idea of, if you're not serving me in my life, whoever you are, it's better that I get rid of you. But there's real repercussions here when you're talking about a parent that people may not think about in the moment. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I really like having this nuanced conversation about estrangement, because I feel like there are real valid reasons to cut off a parent when there's just nothing that's going to help, and it's really hurting you. It's really emotionally hurting you on a constant basis. But I think what happens is people do that before they take the steps necessary to see, is there a possibility of something different happening here? And just because you've tried for years and years and years doesn't mean that there's no possibility. It might mean that the method that you're using to try is not effective. And I'm not saying that that's your fault, because how would you know how to do that? But what I am saying is that people will give up without seeing whether there is flexibility or a place for movement in that parent. And they feel like there isn't because they keep approaching the parent in the same way that is just not effective. And I think it does have widespread repercussions. So what happens is you think, well, I'm cutting off this person, whether it's a parent or a sibling or whatever, whoever it might be. And it affects the entire family. So it affects, if you have children, it affects your children because now they will not know their grandparents. And it might be confusing because they might have had a really beautiful relationship with those parents who couldn't parent you, but could have a different relationship with your children. It affects siblings if you have siblings. So maybe the siblings are not estranged, but you are estranged. And then it becomes very, very complicated in terms of what that does to the sibling relationships and the positions and the triangulations and all the things that end up happening. And I think mostly people don't think about this. It affects you later. So sometimes people will do estrangement and they will realize that was the best decision and I'm really glad I did it. But more often, and I would say very often, people will later think, oh, wow, I really wonder if something different could have happened there later on, much later on.
Yeah.
And then it feels like it's kind of too late in lots of ways. Either the person isn't around, so it's too late, or so many years have passed with the estrangement that it really becomes sort of untenable.
You say that you, when working with parents who've been cut off, I mean, that must be incredibly painful. And sometimes it seems they don't even really understand why they've been cut off. Why would my child do this for me? I gave up everything. I made so many sacrifices. Well-intentioned parents get cut off. They end up in your office, let's say. And you say that you always start with a place of compassion. So
Yeah.
let's start our conversation there when it comes to parents.
I love working with the parents because that's where the most movement can happen. And so what I want to see there is I want to see the nuance of the situation, and I want them to see it, because what happens is they have so much shame that they can't really see the picture. So it's, look at all these things that I did for my child. How could they do this to me? Yeah, I made mistakes, but all parents make mistakes. And, that's what you hear a lot in that first session. What did they expect? I'm not perfect. I'm a parent. People make mistakes. I'm human. And they can't really acknowledge what their child is feeling. So they can't acknowledge the both and of it, that yes, you did your best. By the way, most parents did their absolute best, even if their best was a D+, because they did what they knew how to do. They weren't intentionally thinking, I want to damage my child.
Right.
They didn't know how to parent. And we talk a lot about intergenerational trauma. So when you think about what they had, they will say, oh, my child had such a better childhood than I had. Well, that's fine, but that's not good enough for your child, because your child is not responsible for the childhood that you didn't have. So that's where it gets very tricky. The parent thinks, I did so much better, but your child is not using the same bar that you're using. Your child is saying, but this is what happened in my childhood, regardless of what happened to you. And your child really doesn't care that much about what happened to you in your childhood. Right. So in fact, and maybe you should talk to someone, in my book, one of the main patients that I follow is this woman whose adult children are estranged from her. And she is so confused and heartbroken by this. And and she wants them to forgive her. She wants to explain herself and the why of it. And what I said to her was, they don't need to forgive you. You need to forgive you. And I said, you can have compassion without forgiveness, that your kids might eventually, if you have a relationship with them, have compassion for the struggles that you went through, but they never have to forgive you. And if you keep demanding that from them, you're not going to get anywhere with them. They never in their entire lives will have to forgive you, even if you have a relationship with them. And I think that's an important point, because what they end up feeling, the adult children end up feeling, is this thing I call forced forgiveness. Which is, people say, oh, forgive someone, it will set you free. It often doesn't set you free, because then you feel like, now I'm being sort of re-traumatized. I'm being told I have to forgive this thing. I have to feel something that I don't actually feel. And a lot of estrangement is about, I've been forced to feel things or been expected to feel things that I don't feel. So I've been expected to feel okay about the way things were going in the household, even though it was very difficult for me. I was expected not to feel my pain, even though I was in a lot of pain. And so what I want to do with the parents is I want to start from a place of, I will give them that compassion that their adult children are not able to give them at that point. And I also want to help them see that just because they did hurt their kids, even though they didn't mean to, doesn't mean that they're bad people. And it also means that they can be the parent that their kids need now. So even if they couldn't do it then, how can you be the parent that your kids need now?
Mm.
And that gives them a place to start.
So let's say that, yeah, they want that, parent wants to re-engage their child. In the article you say, but there's a lot of work that they would do in a therapist's office before that. So that's part of it, addressing this intergenerational trauma. But that would involve going back and, looking at this childhood that the parent didn't have. That's not an easy thing to get people to go and look back upon. How do you bring parents around to exploring their own childhood issues in order to reengage their child?
I think you're doing two things at once. You're helping them to see the connections between what was hard for them as a parent and what happened to them as a child, and then how that got transferred into what they did when they were parents. So I think it's all combined. It's not like, let's just spend this portion talking about your childhood. It's let's look at these connections, because I think the connections are very powerful. And I think the other thing that is really important when working with parents is that you need to meet your child where that child is. So it's not about explaining, defending, any of that. It's about curiosity. The parents need to get really curious about how their child feels, and their version of their experience as a child is going to be different from the parent's version of those same events. Right. So we need the parents to understand that there are different realities, and both are different perspectives on the same event. And so you don't want to argue with somebody else's experience. Their experience is their experience. The kid's experience is their experience. If you want a relationship with your child, you need to get very, very curious about your kid's experience. And then instead of defending yourself or explaining, to have compassion for your child. And that's where the healing can start is, oh, I didn't realize that I hurt you in that way. I am so sorry. You know how many decades kids have been waiting to hear that from their parents? I didn't know. I am so sorry. I wish that I had not done it that way. I'm so sorry. I wish I could have given you what you needed. Tell me what you need.
To open up the listen, to listen, to be a listener.
Right. Like for example, in my Dear Therapist column this week, I ran a piece. A father had written in saying, my daughter she wants all these boundaries, and I don't want a bounded relationship. She wants me. I don't think calling once or twice a week to check in is harassing her. And, she wants me to call once or twice a month or whatever it was. And he, and I said to him that all relations are bounded relationships. Relationships are not free-for-alls. Every relationship must have boundaries in order to feel safe and to feel healthy and good and to have trust. And so I think this idea that, parents have this sense of, well, I can call my kid whenever I want, or I can do whatever I want because that's how it's supposed to be. And then they always say the thing about, well, so-and-so calls their daughter every day, right? And it's like there's a different level of trust there. That daughter knows that she can say to her parents, you know what, I'm really busy right now, I can't talk. Right. Or, you know what, can we talk next week? And the relationship wouldn't collapse.
Right. So I just want to remind everyone, if you're tuning in, we're on with Lori Gottlieb, who's the author of Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, and also contributed to our Psychotherapy Networker January issue called Family Riffs. You can go to psychotherapynetworker.org/Gottlieb and not only read the article we're discussing, but get a highly discounted $12 a year subscription to Psychotherapy Networker Magazine. Lori, thank you for being on with us. If you have a question for Lori, please feel free to put it in the chat. I see a lot of people tuning in from around the world: Mexico City, Palestine, New Orleans, Romania, South Carolina, Florida, Canada. People are really wanting to reiterate the difference between child and parent experiences, that they don't have to agree, and have compassion for your child. Excellent point. People are also saying agreeing every relationship must have boundaries. I like a bounded relationship. That's I like that term a lot. Lori, how do you so what is there any other things that you would help prepare a parent to have to hear? It's going to be a hard conversation.
Yeah,
Even
I
if they
always
come with
start.
curiosity, to hear from your child all the ways that you hurt them.
Yeah,
Must be
I
really
would
hard to
say
listen to.
I would say two things. First of all, if your child, people say, well, how do I approach my child who doesn't want to talk to me right now? And I always help them to start with a letter, because I think that, first of all, you're not going to be activated because you're writing the letter, and you can say what you want to say in a calm way. And the letter is an apology. And we have to get to the point with the parents where they are ready to do that and understand that that doesn't mean that they did everything wrong. So, because I feel like the kid will then say, oh, you did this and this and this and this. And it just means they have different perspectives on this. And so, and also you can see this with siblings, right? So that sort of parenting style might have hurt one child, but maybe it didn't hurt the other child. And I think the other thing to remember, because the parents will say, well, my other child is just fine, or my other child doesn't have a problem with this. Every child has different parents in the same family. And what I mean by that is you are a different parent to each child. And I think parents don't realize that the way you think that you're being the same person with each child, but we have a different relationship with each of our children. So just because you grew up in the same household doesn't mean you were the same parent. Each of those kids had different parents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important to remember, even if you tried not to do it that way. It's just human nature. Different personalities react to each other in different ways. The childhood stuff will be layered on differently, been triggered differently by each child in a different way. So you write a letter and you start with an apology. In one of my Atlantic columns, I lay out a letter like that, where you literally say, I miss you so much. I understand you need space. I want to let you know that I feel like I have not been curious enough about your experience. And I would love to get together with a therapist and hear more about what I haven't been able to hear. I know that I've hurt you so much that you feel like you can't be in contact with me. I would like to, if you're willing or able, I would like to go to a therapist so that I can hear the things that I am now ready to hear that I have not been able to hear, because you're so important to me. And I'm sorry that has not come across. And the words are in the Atlantic piece. I'm just riffing right now, but that's the kind of tone and the sentiment of the letter. It's very much, I acknowledge that I've hurt you. I want to understand it better. And I want to hear more about your experience, because I want to be able to be the parent to you that I haven't been able to be.
And then when you are hearing their experience, not to.
That's why I suggest
before,
going to a therapist, because I think it's really hard to do. And I can say, this is why I have so much compassion for the parents. So I'm a parent too, right? And, there are all these ways where we wish we could go back and do things differently. It's really hard to hear. And you need someone to help regulate you during this.
Yeah.
Because I do have so much compassion for the parents. So, often the parents have been through so much themselves. And so for them to feel like the one thing, a lot of kids who had trauma growing up grow up to be parents who thought, I'm going to do everything different than my parents did. I'm going to be a good parent because I had such an unhappy childhood that I'm going to be so different with my kids. And then they replicate it. Maybe it looks different, so they do it differently, but they aren't able to be the parent that they wanted to be. And then when they hear that they disappointed their children, it's really hard for them, because the one goal in their life was, I am going to be a good parent because I didn't have a good parent.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was just going to say, from the kids' side, I think that it's really important from the kids' side that they are open to movement by the parent. So what happens, what I see on the kids' side is they want immediate change and they want all of it at once. So it's like, you're going to do this, 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 and this. Oh, and this, 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 and this, and this. And if you don't do this, I'm cutting you off again. And there's no room for incremental steps. So we had someone on the Dear Therapist podcast. We had a mother and a daughter, and they were estranged, and the daughter was really, really hard on the mother. Like, the mother was trying so hard, and yes, she would slip back a little bit into her defense or her guilt or her shame. And the daughter just had no patience for that. We saw so much improvement in that one session. We do, just for context, on the Dear Therapist podcast, we do an actual session with people, and then we give them homework and they report back the next week. So the mother in that one
Amazing.
session,
I think everyone should tune in and listen to an episode if you haven't already, but just that my plug.
right. So, well, thank you. So, but in this session, we wanted, the daughter wrote in, and we wanted to have both of them. I can't remember if it was the mother or the daughter who wrote in, but we wanted to have both of them on because we wanted that dialogue. And the mother was doing so well. She was so resistant at the beginning. And then she started doing so well. And then she might slip back a little bit into the whole guilt thing, that the daughter felt she was being a victim. But we were like, did you hear the other part though? Did you hear that part? Did you hear her come toward you? Did you hear her take responsibility? Did you hear all of that? And the minute the mother regressed for just a second, the daughter was on her like a bulldog. And it's so painful to watch that. And I understand both perspectives. I understand that the child being so tired of this and feeling so hopeless and feeling like it's never going to change. But you can't expect a person to change immediately. You have to notice the wins, and there were so many wins there. And so then we had them write these letters to each other at the end for the homework, and the mother wrote this letter from the daughter. We said, we want you to write a letter from your daughter's perspective of what her childhood was like. And she wrote this letter. And it's so captured, like, all the times. You must have been so embarrassed to have friends over because I would lose it. Or it must have been awful for you when I was depressed and I was in my room and I was sad and you were all alone and feeling, abandoned. And she said everything in that letter. And we said to the daughter, like, how did you feel? And she said, I didn't really feel anything.
Huh.
And I get that, because it's self-protection.
Yeah.
You can't allow for the possibility that something good will happen, because a lot of these kids, the minute their parents sort of seemed like they were going to, when they're growing up, seemed like they were going to be parents in the way they needed them to be, the other shoe would drop. So they don't trust it yet.
Yeah.
But what I would say to the adult is, you're not a child anymore. You have agency now. As a child, it made sense to protect yourself. You had to. You had no agency. You didn't have the adult resources. But now, you might have your own therapist, you might have friends, you might have a partner, you might have, all of these resources. So you have the social support that you need. And so when this happens, you won't necessarily have to fall apart when your parent regresses a little bit, when the other shoe sort of drops. But are you seeing all the stuff you never got that you're finally getting now? And it's so hard sometimes when the child won't take in all of the good that they're finally getting, that they've wanted for so long, and they can't take it in because it gets drowned out by the other stuff that's also there.
Yeah. So I'm curious. So the mother's homework was to write a letter from what was the daughter's homework?
I'm trying to remember. It was something. Oh, I know what it was. It was to write about, because the daughter had acknowledged in the conversation that there were times when her mother, like times that she cherishes when her mother was really there for her. And that they meant a lot to her. And so we wanted her to just write about, I think, maybe one of those. And the mother was so touched by that.
Oh.
We need to have both in these conversations. We need to have what the parents did right, and that doesn't erase all that they did wrong. So that the child thinks, if I acknowledge that one time, that time that when I was in ballet class and you did that thing and I was so alone and you were there and I felt so loved by you, that erases all of their pain and hurt. No, it doesn't. So you can tell the parent the good things that they did too. And that doesn't mean they're not going to hear all the pain you're in.
Amazingly hard conversations to have if you are a parent or a child, and hard for a therapist, I imagine, to hold that space and see the nuances, live in those nuances, notice the small wins, acknowledge all the things you've been telling us. We're wrapping up. Just a few comments I want to read. Stop trying to repair beyond a point and allow to separate out for full recovery and healing. Stop the abuse by not engaging and by not becoming an enabler. No more sacrifices should be taken, as the time is a very valuable asset. No one should be given time beyond a certain limit, period. That's a very hard and fast comment. We got a lot of those coming in from our magazine issue. And I think my gut told me that there's a lot of people who've been very hurt, and this is, as you started off our conversation talking about those people in estrangement works, and they needed that.
And I think too, we have to talk about, so this person is using the word abuse. If there is abuse, I think that's a different situation, but I also think we want to define what that is. And also we want to see what the parent is capable of. Some parents are just not capable of it. And in that case, yes, then that makes complete sense to protect yourself and separate. What I'm saying is, what I've seen is that there are instances where people don't see what's possible first. And I mean, in the right way, because if you keep doing it in this way that's not effective, then you're going to feel like, well, it is hopeless. But they don't see first what is, they don't do it in this way. And then they don't really know. So I'm not saying stay in an abusive relationship. I just want to be really clear. That is not the message here. The message here is, how can you see what's possible? How can you as a parent see what's possible with your child by approaching them in a very different way than you have? Because what you're doing is clearly not reaching them and is damaging them and hurting them and keeping them in pain. And then what can you do as the child to, to maybe approach your parent differently? And the last thing I'll say is, sometimes you can stay in relationship with your parent, but in a different way, where you grieve the fact that they are not going to be the parent that you wanted or deserved. But there is something you do get out of the relationship, where you're not getting hurt all the time, but where you're getting less. And so maybe it's painful that you're getting less than you would like, because you see other people with their parents and you wish that you had that relationship, but you're getting something that is meaningful enough that it's worth staying in the relationship, even though there's a lot of grief work to do about the fact that your parent will never be exactly the kind of parent you want.
Right. Grieve the ideal that you didn't have, but you can cultivate a relationship. It may not be the ideal relationship, but it's something. And the therapists who are tuning in right now know that they can be and are already an integral part of this process of healing. Lori, thank you so much. We have people saying how great this talk has been, and how much they're looking forward to doing this work with their clients. There's a lot of comments. I'm just reading them as they're popping up. But thank you for joining us. Again, Lori's podcast is Dear Therapists. Lori's weekly Atlantic column is Dear Therapist. Her book, Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, and often contributes to Psychotherapy Networker Magazine. I realize whenever I hold this up that it's backwards and upside down and whatever the mirroring effect does, but I think everyone gets the point. Psychotherapynetworker.org/Gottlieb is the link to read this specific article if you are more of a visual person and want to have it in writing. Also, in that link, you can subscribe to the magazine for $12 a year. That's a special introductory price. We'd really love to get you on board and get you reading and hearing from experts and wonderful people such as Lori. Lori, thank you for supporting us. Thank you for being here. Is there anything else? Let me give you the floor for a few moments. If you're working on something now you'd like to let everyone know about.
No, thank you for the conversation. I'm working on a new book, and people can also watch my TED Talk as we talk today about, what perspective you're coming in with. So my TED Talk is about how changing your story can change your life. And it's really about this taking another perspective and allowing for other perspectives to be part of the story, that the narrative that you're carrying around.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a good weekend, everyone.